Welcome to the FCICA Educational Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us. We are pleased to have Dave Darche, National Market Manager, Adhesives A&D for Bona US with us today presenting Hardwood Floor Finishing. Dave Darche is the National Market Manager, Adhesives A&D for Bona and has been in the wood flooring industry for over 35 years. He is a National Wood Flooring Association Certified Wood Floor Inspector and serves on the National Wood Flooring Association Architect and Design Committee. Welcome, Dave. We're excited to have you. I'm going to turn the controls over to you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Appreciate being here this morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So this presentation, because some of you on the call are here to earn credits, either with AIA or IDCEC, the presentation will maintain its principles of neutrality. But before I begin, I just wanted to mention, I'm Dave. I've been with Bona for 18 years, and prior to joining Bona, I installed, sanded, and finished for over 20 years. And I started using Bona products in 1985. And so one of the things that I do like about this presentation is I feel that I'm just telling you some of the things that I did on behalf of my customers and clients that made them happy. So I feel like I'm sharing what I did with you today. The other thing I want to mention is that last year, Bona celebrated its 100-year anniversary. So the company has a really good history and heritage when it comes to the wood flooring industry, and I hope that everyone enjoys today's presentation. So with that, I am going to get into the presentation now. So the average person who does a PowerPoint presentation speaks 135 words a minute. Most of you can read upwards of 300 words a minute. And you know something? It's a lot easier with your computer or your monitor right in front of you. I speak 97 words a minute. And there is a reason. I am from Boston. And if I do not enunciate every word, every syllable, the most hideous accent on the planet will manifest itself. And I am trying to save you from that because trust me, no one wants to hear Cliff Clavin from Cheers do a CEU. But I also tell you that because I want you to know that I am not going to read this presentation to you. I think we have all sat through way too many of those, and that is not going to happen today. But what I would have everyone pay attention to is that bottom learning objective. And keep in mind, once again, this presentation is really geared towards the A&D community. And I want to highlight the way to evaluate bids better. Obviously, in every market that I go to, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual, there are people who do the work at an elevated level. But there are also people that do work at a level that I cannot reach from a standing position, and I can't even reach it from a sitting position. So the question becomes, what do you get when you go with the elevated commercial installer, and what do you not get when you go with the ones that I cannot reach sitting or standing? So as we go through this presentation, particularly for those of you who don't have a strong background on the wood floor finishing, we're really going to talk about the entire system that goes around a successful wood floor. So one of the things that I've always really appreciated, and it really not only drew me in, but has kept me in the wood flooring industry, is I love the sustainable, renewable message of wood floors. And I'll give you an example of this. I remember years ago, I was working in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I had to tear up a section of flooring. Well, underneath the flooring was the newspaper from the day that floor had been installed. And it was Valentine's Day, 1932. So as I'm looking through this time capsule of history, all of a sudden I came across an ad for the very floor that I was replacing. It was the old 3/8 by 2, and the price on it was 3 cents a board foot. Now, granted, the material that I replaced it with was more than 3 cents a foot at the time, but the point is, by the time I wove that repair in and then used staining and dye and coating techniques, that floor from 1932 easily now had 30, 40, 50 years of life expectancy to it. And so for me, that has always been a great message. When I mentioned I was from Boston, I lied. I'm actually in Plymouth. I'm 40 miles south of Boston. And what's interesting, this year, Plymouth is celebrating its 400-year anniversary of when the Mayflower and the Pilgrims first came here. So it's not unusual in this area of the woods to have floors that are well over 200 years old. So certainly very, very sustainable message. One thing I do want to point out is recently there was a study done, this report came out the end of June of this year, saying that when we refinish a wood floor, there is a 78% carbon footprint reduction. And so I think that's a very positive thing to talk about finishing or refinishing wood floors. And when we do it with resilient floors, there is actually a 92% reduction in carbon footprint. So I think anything that we can do to continue to use renewable sources and make do with what we have is always a good thing. And, the other thing is wood floors are very, very easy to maintain. They don't trap allergens, and they really contribute to positive indoor air quality. It's funny, the last in-person presentation that I did was in San Diego. And it was funny, I happened to be on this particular slide. And one of the attendees, she spilled her wine glass. And so the host just walked over with a microfiber cloth, wiped up the spill, and no major disruption. The show was able to go on. In fact, it was funny, one of the architects who attended accused me of staging that to make my point, and I told him that I certainly wasn't quick enough or clever enough to come up with that, but it did underscore the fact that wood floors are easy to maintain. When it comes to the type of floors that are out there, we'll start with engineered. It's interesting for those of you who've been in the industry for a while, we used to call these laminated wood floors. And then another industry came along, took photographs of wood, put a melamine plastic over it, and they called it laminate. So at that point in time, our industry changed the name to engineered because it really better reflected that overall banded construction. These floors are very ideal for environments that are subject to swings, extreme swings in relative humidity. The downside can be that wear layer, or that layer of lamella, as it's technically referred to, may be so thin that you may not be able to do anything with it down the road. Now, keep in mind, when I make that statement, I am not talking about products that are available at professional distribution and professional flooring stores. I am primarily talking about what is available at the box stores. Because for them to be able to sell at that price, they have to maximize yield. And so that means shorter pieces, narrower widths, thinner wear layers of lamella that once again may not be able to be treated. As Christine mentioned, I serve as an inspector with the National Wood Flooring Association, so I get calls from people from time to time. Well, one day I got a call from a fellow. He went into sand a wood floor, and you know how heavy these machines are. They can be anywhere from 200, 270 pounds, and they spin at 1,700 RPMs. Well, anyways, he takes his first pass with the big machine, and the floor turns white. And so he calls me in a panic because he didn't know what happened. So I thought about it for a minute. And when I say I thought about it for a minute, I really only thought about it for 3 seconds, but I paused, and then I congratulated him on sanding his first vinyl floor. In other words, it looked woodish. It had some kind of wood grain to it. It was not wood. And the reason why I congratulated him on sanding his first vinyl floor is I was pretty confident he was going to do it at some point in his career again. That story, which, by the way, that story is true, does underscore the fact that there are some engineered products out there that we might not be able to treat down the road. And this is different from solid wood floors that are 3/4 of an inch thick, and there's about 5/16 of an inch above that tongue and groove engagement. Keeping in mind that the average floor sanding takes about 1/32 of an inch of material off, it's not unusual that a wood floor can be sanded anywhere from 5 to 8 times. And something else that is happening in our industry is that we're getting more orbital types of sanding machines out there that take even less than 1/32 of an inch off. And so this will go a long way towards maintaining floors that will continue to be used successfully for well over 100 years. And essentially, we're able to use individual pieces, they're splined together and installed. Just keep in mind that when you specify a lot of really good advantages when it comes to unfinished wood, and you definitely have a lower lifetime cost. So when we look at the species that are commonly used in North America, this is a pretty good reflection of what they are. And if you look at the left-hand side of the photograph, you can see what these species look like when they're coated with waterborne finish, and the bottom right-hand corner when they are coated with oil. And we'll talk a little bit more later about the differences between oil and water. Now, when it comes to what's being installed in North America, please keep in mind that this slide is about 3 years old, and I can tell you that white oak is probably closer to that 40% mark. And it's kind of interesting. I was at an architectural conference a couple of years ago. It was Bond Custom. They call it speed dating with architects. And I had 23 half-hour one-on-one meetings over the course of 2 days. But what was interesting about that conference was that I must have heard the word timeless used on at least 6 occasions. And I kept thinking about that. And then it dawned on me that I've been able to walk on some of the castle floors over in Europe, Versailles and Fontainebleau, and they're all quarter-sawn white oak floors, and they convey that sense of timelessness that people are looking for. No doubt due to the narrower grain, because of the neutral color, we're seeing white oak continue to grow in popularity. I don't want to call it a trend. I just see it as a development within our industry. Now more than ever before, home, health, and humanity have become very, very important to each and every one of us. And it's interesting, over the years, I have heard people talk about wood floors as like they're living, breathing things. They are not. They are quite deceased, as a matter of fact. But what's interesting is they behave like a living, breathing material. It has a touch. It has a dimensional effect when you look at it, and it has a warm feel to the touch. And so certainly wood makes for a home application, but we're also starting to see it more used in commercial spaces, not only as part of the flooring structure, but we're seeing more of it used in wall applications. I actually started seeing that in the Toronto market about 8-9 years ago, and it definitely creates that feeling. You know, talking to architects and designers, the challenges that they face is they're trying to get people to feel grounded and connected to the space, and so wood can definitely contribute to that environment. So when I first got into this industry, the subject of acclimation is very interesting because every manufacturer at that time had in their installation instructions, bring it into the home, let it sit for 2 weeks. It was almost universal. And I remember thinking to myself, why would I bring wood here in New England into someone's home in mid-August, let it pick up moisture, install it, and then have the heating season start up a month later? It never made any sense to me, but fortunately I tutored under a tremendous technician who taught me so much about the industry. And I remember Howard would always tell me, Dave, when it comes to acclimation, it is not a time thing. It is a moisture thing. And so that has really helped me in my career. So in other words, there are some times we need to bring wood into a home for a week, 2 weeks, in order for it to acclimate to the living conditions that that floor is going to be used in. Other times, you are able to bring wood right into the home, and because it's equilibrated to the environment that it's going to be lived in, you can install it right away. So the photograph on the right shows the proper way to acclimate. You can see that it's off of the substrate. There's enough space between the various bundles to allow for air movement. Now, in installing wood floors, we're probably going to use adhesives to some degree. Certainly, if we're on gypcrete, if we're on concrete, we are going to glue that wood floor down. And it's interesting, years ago, because adhesive technology was limited then, a lot of us were installing a finger block parquet or 9x9 engineered blocks because that's all the adhesive was able to do. Nowadays, there are adhesives on the market that can install 9-inch wide solid planks over both concrete and gypcrete. The other thing that we're seeing is what's referred to as a nail and glue assist. My colleague Wayne Highlander was at a NWFA panel a couple of years ago, and it was all on squeaking and popping floors. And I remember him telling me that it was probably one of the most widely attended seminars at that particular convention. And the key takeaway from it was that because we're installing wider floors, we're essentially using less fasteners. And if you think about that, years ago when we were installing strip floor, 2 1/4-inch strip floor, think of an area of a 4x8 sheet of plywood. If you were following manufacturer's recommendations and doing every 8, 10, 12 inches, there'd be about 130 nails securing that wood floor to the substrate. Now, what happens when we go to a 6-inch plank? We're using 2/3 less fasteners when we need to use more. So that's why earlier this year, NWFA, in revising their installation guidelines, now recommend that when we install 5-inch and wider planks, that we do it as a nail and glue assist. I could go and talk quite a bit about the history of, cutback adhesive and PVAs and chlorinated solvents, but we don't have the time today. But I am going to focus on the 2 main technologies in today's marketplace. They are urethane and silane adhesives. Urethanes have been used successfully to bond wood floors to the substrate. The only downside is that they contain isocyanates, which give them the strength. The downside of it is that if we get that urethane adhesive on the surface of a pre-finished wood floor and we don't clean it up immediately, it will eat into or etch the finish. One of the things that I do for the National Wood Flooring Association is I also read and I grade inspection reports. And I received one about 2.5 years ago. An inspector went out to look at a 1,500 square foot floor. Well, he opens the door and there were 1,200 pieces of blue tape all over that floor, identifying where every spot of adhesive had occurred. Now, the inspector, to his credit, said, well, you can hire a professional to come in, abrade the surface, recoat the floor. And the homeowners were like, nope, we paid for factory finish. And so that poor fellow had to go in, rip out that floor, replace it out of his own pocket. And, you know, I'm familiar with that pain. It's not something you want to have to experience. But as I'm reading this inspection report, I'm saying to myself, if only that flooring contractor had known about a newer technology, and that is silane-based adhesives. While it is newer technology, it is not new. It has been on the marketplace since 2004. Generally, they have better shear strength than their urethane counterparts, but because they don't contain isocyanates, you can get the adhesive on the surface and still clean it up to 72 hours later. I've actually cleaned up silane spots a year after the fact. I don't encourage it, but the point is you can finish an installation on a Friday, and if you get a call over the weekend that there's spots of glue on the floor, you can go back confident that you are able to clean those spots up. And then the other thing that makes wood floors unique is that they're always under forces of shrink and swell. And so you want properties to account for that. You know, if you're doing a home project and you're putting together a kitchen table or a coffee table, you want to use a rigid adhesive because you don't want those independent elements of wood moving independently. You want them to be solid. Not so with a wood floor. You may have hundreds, if not thousands, of individual pieces that need to move. And so the property that you want to look for is elongation. I call it wiggle room. If the room goes out of equilibrium, the adhesive will allow it to move. It won't let it move into the next room, but it will allow it to move so that when the room goes back to equilibrium, the adhesive now has the ability to pull it back into position. And then we always advocate, recommend, and promote checking the moisture content. You saw the species of slides earlier. Every single one of those species has what's referred to as a DCC, a dimensional change coefficient. And what that means is if we know the moisture content of the substrate, and we know the moisture content of the wood, and we know the temperature of the room, and we know the relative humidity of the space, we can do the math. And we can figure out exactly the dimensional change that that floor will experience based on the seasons. The two main tests for checking moisture content in substrates, particularly concrete, are calcium chloride and the RH test. ASTM used to recognize both of these tests as being conclusive after 72 hours. That changed early last year when ASTM now recognizes the RH test as being conclusive in 24 hours. A couple of years ago, it was last year, in one of the industry publications that we all get, there was a survey done on whether installers are seeing more or less moisture problems. And the answer was that they're seeing more. And the reason why I bring this out is I continue to see and hear more manufacturers saying, don't test, just go ahead, and if it looks dry, go ahead and install the floor, and we got you covered. Well, years ago, qualitative testing was all that we had available. There was very little quantitative testing available in the marketplace. And now I know that there are several FCICA members who manufacture moisture meters and some really impressive ones. Let's make sure that we are testing, because when we know a math equation, we can predict the results. But 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 cannot equal 4 if one of the ones is missing. That's why we need all this information prior to installing a wood floor. And I had a friend and colleague who used to describe the differences between these tests. He compared a calcium chloride test to getting an X-ray, and he compared an RH test to getting an MRI. In other words, you just get a better visual of what is going on. So make sure you check for moisture, whether it's in the wood, whether it's in the substrate, and you will have very, very good successful installations. When it comes to the floor sanding process, what you're really trying to do, if you look at that bottom illustration, is achieve a fine scratch pattern that cannot be observed from a standing position because no one wants to pay to see scratches. And it allows for the uniform coating of a wood floor. Generally, whether we're using an oil-based polyurethane or a waterborne finish, a sealer and 2 coats of finish give us the equivalent of about 3 pieces of paper, 3 mils of protection, and that protects the floor from people walking on it, using it, spilling the occasional glass of wine on it. There are some products out there that when you use a sealer and 2 coats of finish, you actually get 4 mils of protection. And so if some of you stay till the end of the presentation, I'll tell you what product that is. The sand and finish process, the picture on the left is no exaggeration. For years, that was the only way we could do it. There was no dust containment equipment available for our industry. And I remember I would have customers who did not want me in their homes because they did not want to have to go through this experience. So they would wait till they went on vacation. But fortunately, it was right around 95, 96, dust containment equipment was made available for the wood flooring profession. And what this did is it resulted in visibly better looking floors because you didn't have all this dust that was airborne now settling down into the freshly coated floor. But even more important, we talked earlier about how oak, whether it's red or white, is about almost 70% of what's being installed out there. Not only is oak dust a sensitizer, it is a carcinogen. And we simply do not want the people doing the work, their clients, their families, their pets being exposed to carcinogens. Because when someone comes into your home with bags on their machine, they are off the charts when it comes to dust exposure. But when someone comes into your home with dust containment systems that have HEPA-Vacs on them, or dust evacuation systems that completely remove the dust in hoses out to a van or a curbside truck, you stay well under OSHA's threshold. And by the way, remember at the beginning, we talked about evaluating bids better. For those of you who are consumers or specifiers in this call, don't ever hesitate to have someone define to you what they mean by dust containment. I'll give you an example. I was out on the West Coast, and I hear a project manager talking to the wood floor guy, and I hear him say, now you're going to use dust containment. The answer was, yep, yep, yep. I rolled my eyes, but I was there for a completely different reason. So anyways, project manager leaves, wood floor guy walks over to me, and I go to him. I'm like, hey, what do you use for dust containment? He gave me the most pathetic look I've ever seen, and then he pointed. He said, we closed the door. That was his idea of containment. He closed the door to the room, the home, the commercial space that he was in. That was his idea of containment. Once again, don't hesitate to have them define to you what they mean. Color is a big world. I'm not qualified enough to talk about color. My 2 favorite colors are black and white. I'll let other people talk about color. But in addition to color, you also have the opportunity for aesthetics. To give you an example, the one on the upper right, wire brush. This used to be a very labor-intensive process. Now there are machines on the market that will brush out that soft part of the grain, creates a really good dimensional effect just of itself, or if you're attempting to cherusse a floor, really good options that are out there. They're almost endless at this point. But primarily, whether you stain a wood floor or whether you seal a wood floor, both stain and sealers are accomplishing the same thing. They are designed to get in between the seams of the board and dry brittle. And this allows for the natural movement of the wood. The other thing that the sealers do is that they minimize what I call the extractive rise in tannins, resins, whatever, from wicking up into the finish. And I'll give you an example of this. Years ago, I had finished sanding a wood floor, vacuumed it, wanted to get a coat on it. I went out to my van, and I did not have any waterborne sealer, but I did have waterborne finish. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I pay more money for waterborne finish, so I'm giving my customer a better job. So I coated the floor and went home happy. So proud of myself. So one of the things that makes red wine really delicious is that it sits in white oak barrels, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 5 years, and it extracts the tannins. When you apply a waterborne finish to a white oak floor, it too extracts the tannins and turns the floor green. And since green was not in vogue at that time, that was a floor I resanded and got an education on sealer. Your finish coats are really about your durability, not only your durability, but also your sheen levels. You know, for so many years, all we had was satin semi-gloss, 30, 60, 90-degree reflective. 100%, no light escapes from it. Now you have finishes on the market that have gloss levels of between 5 and 7. It almost looks like there's no film finish on the floor at all. It is a very, very popular look. The other thing I wanted to mention about sealers, you know, when waterborne first came out in 1979, it was clearly colorless, and a lot of people didn't like it. And I know here in the New England market, there were not a lot of initial fans. Nowadays, fortunately, though, these waterborne sealers have color built into them if you want. If you want to have that oil look, you can buy products that have amber tones to it, or you can have ones that have like a Nordic white look to it. Almost looks like the floor has been stained white, but that look is actually contained in the sealer. And we also have sealers now that leave the raw look of the wood intact. I remember sanding floors, and people would look at the freshly sanded floor and says, can't we just leave it that way? And I would be like, no, I have to put something on top of it, and it's going to dramatically change the tone. Now you have sealers that will allow for that raw look. And then we have more of these penetrating oils, hard wax oils coming over into the marketplace from Europe. Big or easiest way to describe the difference between the two is that a penetrating oil bonds chemically with the cell structure, and a hard wax occupies the cell of the wood cell and sits on top of it. So two different technologies to protect the floor. Keep in mind, these are much better technologies than the old stain and paste wax that was done for many years, but they still require maintenance. So I always just encourage people, find out how your customers are going to inhabit the space, and you'll be able to make a recommendation for them. You know, the evolution of finishes has really come a long way since I've been in the industry. I could tell you lots of funny stories associated with what comes out of the little red bug, but we don't have enough time. But these are your three main finish classifications. I'll start with the one in the middle, oil-based. While these products are labeled combustible, they are not flammable. They are used successfully day in and day out. But what people are getting tired of, I talk to wood flooring contractors, they're tired of the high VOCs. They're tired of the smell. And you know what they're also tired of? The call from the homeowner. When is this smell going to go away? And that relates to cure, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But anyways, this has driven more people into waterborne class 3 because people can actually inhabit the space of their home while the work is being done. The one class of product I will throw under the bus is your class 1s. These are solvents that have a flash point of under 100 degrees. And I'll give you an example, lacquer. Lacquer has been used extensively in our industry because it dries so quickly. But then again, when you use lacquer and you use a coat of fast dry poly and one coat of poly, you're only getting maybe 2 mils of protection. You are not getting the 3, possibly 4 mils that are available. But the real problem with lacquer is its flash point. It has a flash point of 12 degrees. So it can be Christmas Day, Boston, Chicago. We can have windows, doors open, and all someone has to do is unplug an extension cord, and those fumes will ignite. Where I'm from, in 2004, we lost 2 wood flooring contractors. In 2005, we lost another. The governor actually put together a task force that I was able to serve on. It took us 5 years, but we were able to pass legislation prohibiting and banning the use of lacquer in commercial floor coating. I've walked on some pretty impressive floors all over the world. I have yet to set foot on one that was worth my life or the life of my fellow man. So since no one on today's call wants to specify destruction, we're just going to concentrate on these two, oil-based and waterborne finish. You know, all wood, when it's exposed to UV, to temperatures, even to some of the chemical composition of the wood itself, will age. But when we put an oil base over wood, the oil-based finish is also going to darken, and so it really accelerates that process, whereas the waterborne finish will not change color, and now the look that you have specified is going to be maintained a lot longer. And then, you know, I talked earlier about cure, and when I use the word cure, I'm talking about when we can put the area rugs back down. A good oil base takes 2 weeks to cure before we can put the area rugs down. A good waterborne takes 1 week to cure. A fantastic waterborne will cure in 3 days, 72 hours, and you can put the area rugs back down on the floor, and I can talk about that at the end of the presentation if anyone wants to hear. And then finally, Tabor abrasion tests have shown that waterborne is more durable than oil. By the way, as a manufacturer, this is probably the easiest test in the world to manipulate. So if someone is ever going to show you Tabor abrasion results, make sure, you know, as you can see on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, done by an independent third party. Those are results that you can put some confidence in. So I would look for that third-party verification. And then finally, we also have finishes now that meet or have certain coefficient of friction so that when it comes to ADA recommendations or guidelines for assisted living facilities or ramps, you can actually meet those COF standards. Years ago, we had to add silica, sand, you know, to our finish to get that coefficient of friction. Now it's built right into the finish itself. So we have the opportunity to specify a complete system versus specifying incompatibility. And now I am briefly just going to touch on floor care, only because it seems to be the most unspecified part when it comes to wood floors. I continue to see people taking spaghetti mops and swabbing the deck of the USS Popeye using way too much water, or treating a wood floor just like you would an LVT, an LVP, a tile, stone, whatever, and damage is done. I continue to hear about people using vinegar and water. Now, some of you on the call today might say, well, Dave, what's wrong with vinegar and water? That sounds about as homey a recipe for cleaning a floor that you can come up with. Well, what a lot of folks don't realize is that the vinegar destroys the lignin. The lignin is that little thread that connects the cells together. And so what happens, particularly in the soft part of the grain, or what's referred to as the early wood, that vinegar eats away and now makes it more susceptible to indentation, pitting and discoloration. And so it makes that floor ugly out prematurely. We don't recommend steam mops because they inject moisture that they then do not extract. And so we continue to see way too much water being used in the cleaning process. I will have you look at the left-hand side of your screen, those terms on the very bottom. I'm just going to quickly delineate between these, only because they're starting to be used interchangeably and they do mean different things. When we clean something, we remove germs from the surface, but we do not kill them. When we disinfect, and keep in mind that disinfecting and antibacterial mean the same thing. In order to disinfect and antibac correctly, we must clean first, then use the disinfectant antibac for whatever time period the manufacturer suggests, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 10 minutes on the surface, before we clean it off, and then we have done accordingly. Antimicrobial is a little bit different. Antimicrobial in a coating protects what's underneath the coating. It does not protect what's on top of the coating. So think about it. If I am touching an antimicrobial coating, my touch is not being protected. The material underneath it is. So whether I touch, whether my dogs scamper over that surface, or whether my grandchild crawls around, he is not protected. They are not protected. Underneath is. And it's interesting, over the years as an inspector, I've seen powder posts, I've seen beetles, termites and so forth. I've seen a lot of damage that can result. I've not seen a wood floor eaten away by microbes. Not yet anyways. Maybe that'll be new. When it comes to taking care of the floor, here are your 3 easy steps. Dust mop, vacuum sweep, get all the bunny hairs off the floor. Use a pH neutral cleaner. And you also have the opportunity to professionally deep clean your wood floors. If you look at that middle illustration, you can see that the left-hand side of the floor is visibly cleaner because these machines have the ability to take cleaning solutions, inject them into the wood floor, but then they also contain vacuums that are able to extract as much moisture as has been injected. And so therefore you can have your floor professionally cleaned, and not only will it be visibly cleaner, but it will also be cleaner to, walk, touch, feel, and so forth. And then you always have the opportunity to recoat a wood floor down the road. Maybe when you did your floors last time, you were glossy, and now you've matured a little bit and you want something satin or extra matte. You can hire a professional to come in, clean and abrade the surface, and they can recoat that floor, which once again extends that life of that floor well beyond that 100-year life cycle. Well, according to the EPA, we spend way too much time indoors, and I, for one, am starting to agree with them. And it's interesting, it was figured out that it was 90% of the time before all this happened to us. It's probably more now. So the thing is I know that some of you on the call today are specifiers, but we are all consumers. And I think it's important to look for third-party certification in the things that we use in our businesses or the things that we buy for our families. Over the years, you see a lot of greenwashing go on. I remember one time seeing a product labeled one day, it had like skulls and crossbones on it, and then the next day it had kittens and unicorns, and yes, I am stretching the bounds of credulity on that one, but just because we put a fig leaf on something does not make it environmentally friendly. So look for third-party certification, and then keep in mind that when you do specify unfinished wood flooring and low VOC adhesives and low VOC finishes, that contributes to the total lead points that are available for your various categories, whether it's platinum, gold, silver, and so forth. And so that is available to you. In fact, speaking of VOCs, remember years ago when you would buy a new car you buy a new car and you'd open the door. Oh, that smell was so great. That was all VOCs. That was the carpet off-gassing. It was the bucket seat off-gassing. It was the dashboard off-gassing. And now to get that smell, you have to go to the auto parts store and you buy the little tree that says new car scent. I call it the VOC tree. This is our final slide. So in conclusion, you have the opportunity to specify a complete system. Please demand dust containment. You all know the reason why, and insist on waterborne finishes. You know, I'm a late adapter when it comes to almost everything, including technology, which is probably why I got bumped off the call today. But I was an early adapter to waterborne finishes. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, I started using waterborne finishes in 1985 because I did the research and I felt that they were better for my clients, but I also had my sons working with me, and I didn't want them exposed to some of these harsher solvents, and I'm really glad that I made that personal and professional decision. And by doing all of this, you have the opportunity to contribute towards a very happy, healthy environment for you, your family, your friends, your clients, and to all. So that is the official presentation. That is my email address if any of you want to contact me. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Bill.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was a very informative presentation. If the audience and the attendees have any questions, please put them now in the Q&A box to the left of your screen. We have about 7 minutes left, and we have a number of questions already entered. So, Dave, the first question is, any idea when in-person training at your facilities will start back up for basic sand and refinish?
In some markets, that has already started up. I know that in Denver, within the last week or two, that has taken place. I was on a conference call yesterday. Georgia is still off limits. And I know that right now, none of our U.S. personnel are allowed to go up into the Canadian market. So we don't see anything happening up there till Q2. But what I would do is feel free to either send me an email, or if you know who your territory manager is, we can get you up to speed on whatever area you're from to tell you when training will resume. But it has in certain places.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what third-party certification has Bona achieved? So,
for years, since I've been with Bona, we've looked to GreenGuard in order, for our not only our finishes but our abrasives and the dust containment systems. But recently, we had a first. The Bona adhesive line, which is silane based, achieved the GreenGuard Gold certification. This used to be referred to as the GreenGuard, I think it was hospitals and schools. So it was definitely a higher level of, I think there's something like 350 ingredients that are looked at in order to be able to get that designation. But yeah, just a couple of months ago, Bona is the first adhesive company to get GreenGuard Gold for that adhesive product line.
Next question is, which Bona finish cures in 3 days?
That would be the Bona Traffic HD. And, when I talked about cure earlier, I mentioned that a good oil takes 2 weeks to cure. And it's funny, a mediocre oil, there are some products out there that actually take a month before they cure. And there are some waterborne finishes on the marketplace that take 2 weeks to cure. And so anytime that you can have a product that cures in 72 hours or 3 days, so that the businesses can get operational more quickly, I think is a very strong advantage both for both commercially and residentially. So that would be Bona Traffic HD.
Okay, next question is, can't a product have a low VOC yet still have a distinctive odor?
So when applying products, I think they all have individual unique properties to them. What we are looking for, and what I remember looking for as a professional flooring contractor, was to try to find products that minimized as much smell as possible and maintained low VOCs. And keep in mind that once a coating is cured, it is no longer emitting or off-gassing. Off-gassing is something that happens with all film-based coats prior to drying as a film and then curing. So I think that's a place where these Bona regional training centers are a good place to find out if.
Okay, well, I have just a moment for one more question. And can Bona adhesives be used over radiant heat and rubber underlayments?
Yes, they can. The interesting thing about the Bona adhesives, we call them by designations that start with the letter R, and the R stands for reactive. So the adhesive doesn't work because it's sticky. It works by reaction. And so whether it's radiant systems like warm board, or whether it's rubber underlayments, deglazed tiles, Advantech, metals, the adhesive works with a number of those substrates. Really about the only things that we don't work with are plastic or closed cell foam underlayments, but almost all of your other underlayments are able to be used with just that one product, Bona R851.
Okay, thank you so much, Dave. We're coming to the end of the program. So if there aren't any more questions, then on behalf of FCICA, thank you, Dave, for presenting today's webinar, Hardwood Floor Finishing. SIMs may now navigate to the Submit Credit tab to receive credits. Please note that you must be signed into the educational platform for this feature to work. And if you have any issues, please let us know. This is the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, Dave.